Welcome, I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. Today we'll talk about the astrology of September 2021. First, I wanted to say thank you to all of my patrons. I really appreciate all of your support. If you would like to become a patron and get early access to these forecasts, which are usually available to the public the first of every month, but patrons get them a lot earlier, you can go to patreon.com/Nina Griffin, and where you'll find a lot more resources on astrological magic, astrology, just plain astrology, magic, everything all together. All right, let's talk about September. So first, let's recap August. Now, as predicted, August definitely brought some heat in the Northern Hemisphere, but less so than July, because Mars was now in Virgo, which is a cold sign. It's still a dry sign, so we're not really out of the woods as far as fires or dry winds, but it was definitely a little bit less crazy in terms of the super intense heat waves. Now, the other thing that happened in August is that we had a lot of fairly tense aspects in the first half of the month, and a lot of them kind of manifested as standoffs or as crises, and a lot of this peaked around that Mercury-Mars conjunction mid-month, Mercury conjoining Mars in Virgo. So now let's talk about how all of these influences make their impact felt in September. So starting off week 1, September 2nd, we get Mars opposing Neptune at 22 Virgo and 22 Pisces. Now, in my opinion, not every aspect to an outer planet is going to manifest with equal strength, but because Mars is one of the so-called superior planets, which includes Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, it's going to make its impact felt, especially on the collective scale, but also personally, if there's something going on with Mars in our charts. So this combination, Mars and Neptune, is particularly not good for epidemics, because that is one of the significations of the outer planets, especially Neptune. In terms of mundane events, this combination often leads to disasters like big storms, also earthquakes, as well as more social engineering, aggressive misinformation, propaganda that can lead to violence, that kind of stuff. So we are lucky that this year this is really only happening once, at least this opposition, since Mars is direct, so he's not doing this 3 times or anything like that. On the personal level, this is probably not a good time to get into conflicts because things are going to be confusing, but also there's going to be a feeling that we are fighting something much larger than ourselves. It's like fighting the ocean. You really can't win. The ocean will win every single time. The second week is a little bit more eventful. September 6th, we've got the new moon at 14 Virgo, and this is usually a modest and very focused new moon. It's focused on harvesting fruits of earlier efforts, but this time it's going to conjoin Mars at 24 Virgo, so it's going to bring more heat and conflict to the next 2 weeks than we ordinarily would see just with Virgo. Now, this can and I think will be moderated by other planetary placements that we'll talk about in a minute. But this combination of Mars with that new moon will create fires that are real and metaphorical. So the background theme, the background feeling of the next 2 weeks is going to be kind of intense. It's going to be fiery. It's definitely going to be more combustible than we would ordinarily see. Now remember that Virgo is the realm of business, agriculture, and schools, which will be the areas that I think are ripest for disruption during this period. So we could see conflict, we could see crises in these different realms of our lives. Now, the same day, September 6th, Venus will also trine Jupiter at 25 Libra and 25 Aquarius. So this is a very harmonious combination, and it has Venus on Spica, which is a very beneficent fixed star at 24 Libra, and she trines Jupiter. So here is an opportunity for healing, for growth against this fairly volatile new moon. So this new moon wants to start fires, but Venus trine Jupiter provides the opportunity to put the fires out with compassion and plant the seeds of a much more harmonious future. So the question is, do we take that opportunity, or do we just kind of go the way of the lowest common denominator to Mars? Now, September 10th, Venus will enter Scorpio. She is in her detriment in Scorpio, so it's a big loss of dignity because she goes from Libra, which is her domicile, where she's very strong and happy, right into her detriment. So because of that, we might hear about a loss of status or loss of rights for a woman or a group of women around this time. Generally, Venus has a tough time going through Scorpio, but especially so this year because she's going to come to a square of Saturn in Aquarius, and then, of course, the opposition to Uranus in Taurus, remaking that Saturn-Uranus square, which has really been in the background this whole year. So remember that the extremes of Saturn and Uranus, oppression on the one hand versus anarchy on the other, are going to have a woman or women in general caught in their midst. So suddenly women become this kind of political football of some kind. It's going to be an interesting time. It's certainly not a good time to be in a Venusian role while Venus passes through Scorpio. So on a personal level, it's probably something we want to avoid. The third week of September, it's going to be pretty active. September 14th, Mars will enter Libra. And this is always important because, again, Mars is one of the superior planets. So when he changes signs, it's always going to be noticeable, and it's going to impact us individually as well as collectively. Now, Mars in Libra is in his detriment, and this is a real loss for Mars, who goes from being peregrine in much of Virgo into being peregrine and in his detriment in Libra. So remember, Venus and Mars are both going to be in signs that are inimical to them, where they're in their detriment at this time. So you kind of need to strike a balance, right? You don't want to take on the role of Mars, of being the person who's pushy, who's disruptive, who's demanding their rights, but you also don't want to be kind of the extreme conciliator either. You kind of want to be maybe Mercury, right? You want to be the messenger. You don't want to be in either of the warring camps. It's just not going to be a winning situation for anyone. Now, if you remember, if you watched my videos from 2020, especially the second half, I advised people not to take on the role of aggressive Mars. And so that warning is basically back for the next 6 weeks or so. Mars is not going to be actively crushed the way that he was in 2020, because that was a hard aspect to Saturn. But nonetheless, as he goes through Libra, he will be on the back foot and not very effective. So again, people who take on that role of Mars, whether we see that in our personal lives or in the world at large, people who stoke conflicts, people who are starting something, who bring division into that collective, they will do particularly badly now. And it's going to be fascinating to see around that mid-September as Mars changes signs, how that'll manifest. Now, just 2 days later, September 16th, Venus will square Saturn at 7 Scorpio, 7 Aquarius. Now, Venus runs into Saturn. She is in bad shape. Like I said, she's in detriment and she squares Saturn without reception. Just as it's not good to be the warrior right now, neither is there reward in being the active peacemaker, as I said. So she is dominant, she is overcoming Saturn because she is earlier in the zodiac than Saturn is. Nonetheless, she is not very well poised to win, and it could be kind of an ugly, dragged out fight that I don't think anybody really wants to be part of. So again, in the world, we might see women caught in the middle of the struggle between the two extremes of Saturn and Uranus. This could play out with specific women in leadership roles, so for example in large corporations as well as politics or the public life. But also we could see it with women's rights in general, so we'll have to see how that turns out. Week 4 is going to be very busy. September 20th, Mercury will trine Jupiter at 23 Libra, 23 Aquarius. And this is positive. It's an opportunity for science, for school, business, or legal growth and progress. Again, Mercury's on Spica, which is that fixed star that rules material abundance and protection, as well as what I call the blessings of living in society, right? Where we benefit from collective efforts. And we could get news of some medical advancement that benefits mercurial people, business, students, the law. Maybe there's going to be some exciting new vaccine or medication that's going to come up against COVID that will be approved or will become available around now. September 20th, the full moon is going to be at 28 Pisces. Now, this full moon is ruled by Jupiter in Aquarius, trine Mercury in Libra. However, the moon will shortly oppose Mars just after changing signs. So this repeats some of those earlier themes of the new moon of aggression, whether it's social or we're talking about COVID outbreaks on the one hand, but then we also get this helping hand and ingenuity to negotiate a better solution on the other. So yes, there are definitely tensions, there are challenges, but they all come with some built-in solutions and opportunities to make things better, which isn't always the case, so we should always take advantage. September 22nd, the Sun will enter Libra. And this is the sign of the Sun's fall, and it marks the start of, well, fall or autumn. The Libra Ingress is one of the cardinal ingresses of the Sun, and it forecasts events in a given location for the fall season. So the chart is a bit different depending on where you cast it for, depending on that location, but the planetary positions are going to be the same throughout. So this ingress has some characteristics of what I would call public perverseness, in the sense of you tell people something that's good or that's good for them, and just because humans are being human, they're like, no, I don't want it, you can't make me. So this is the moon opposing Mercury on Spica, right? Mercury on Spica shows a great gift or a blessing that people just don't want. And so there's going to be a whole video about this because there's a lot more to be said about this ingress. But just to give you a taste of some of the issues we'll be dealing with for most of the rest of this year. September 23rd, Venus will square Uranus at 14 Scorpio Taurus. So this bookends that theme started by Venus entering Scorpio earlier in the month. Women, again, individually and collectively, are now part of this year's negotiation between Saturn and Uranus. And this is one of those days where that tension will be highlighted. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out. September 25th is an interesting aspect. Mars in Libra will trine Saturn at 7 Libra, 7 Aquarius. Mars trine Saturn is kind of like a compromise between two tough choices. Mars in Libra is received by Saturn into Saturn's exaltation, but Mars is still in detriment, remember. So it's something like a person without many resources, Mars, making a deal that he can't refuse with someone much more powerful, Saturn in Aquarius. Another way of looking at this aspect is that Mars, despite wanting to prove everyone else wrong and that, he is right, he tries to make a deal with reality. And it's kind of a recognition or even a compromise, which is shocking. It's a compromise by Mars, recognition that he can't win this one, which is a rare experience for the god of war. So I wonder if we're going to get some people coming back to reality right around now. They still think they can kind of negotiate with reality, and I think they're going to get a more intense experience of that later when Mars goes through Scorpio. But for the time being, Mars thinks that he can make a deal, and he kind of does for now. I think that this could be good for getting COVID under control in some places, but of course this is one of those diseases that just pops up kind of like whack-a-mole all over the place. Now the last week of September, week 5, we get September 26th, Mercury will station retrograde at 25 Libra. So he is on Spica when he does this station, and it's very significant because Mercury on Spica describes schools, the law, agriculture, business, all these really important social institutions. So I think that we'll see schooling being rethought. It might be remade in some places, as well as discussions and additional negotiations concerning infrastructure. Remember that word? Big theme this year. As Mercury will trine Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius this whole time as well, since they're in air signs. Now, September 29th, the Sun will trine Saturn at 6 Libra and 6 Aquarius, and this echoes the theme of Mercury trine Jupiter from last week. Again, infrastructure and social benefits, both in the short and in the longer term, become important, and they're going to become visible because that is the nature of the Sun, and the Sun, of course, illuminates whatever he aspects. September 30th, Venus will square Jupiter at 22 Scorpio, 22 Aquarius. And this is another point of tension where we want to have things that are good for society at large, Jupiter and Aquarius, but we aren't able to figure out how to have them work for women and other Venusian kinds of people. So I wonder if this is some kind of political sacrifice of women's rights or something similar at this time, where somebody's rights, Venusian people's rights, become subordinate to what's considered good for society in terms of Jupiter in Aquarius. So to summarize, this month has this background theme of tension and volatility, but also many opportunities for compromise, growth, and positive solutions, as indicated by the many air triplicity aspects happening this month. On a personal level, it's really important not to lose sight of the many possible change points that are being served up to us. That is the beauty, I think, of knowing astrology. We know when these opportunities are coming up, we know what they can do for us, and we can plan for them. All right, I hope you enjoyed this forecast. My name is Nina Griffin. Please feel free to subscribe. I appreciate your watching. Till next time.